Hey guys, it's Sean, and I'm here to introduce you to a bonus episode of ReelBlend, an interview that we did with Elijah Wood on behalf of his new film, No Man of God. I was not able to join the boys for this one. I was coming back from CinemaCon, and you'll hear on the show where I discuss a lot of the footage that we were able to see as part of the major studio panels. But we got some time with Elijah Wood, following up on the conversation we had with his director, Amber Seeley, which you should check out as well, too, once you've seen No Man of God. But once you get Elijah Wood, there's so many things in his filmography that we could dive into, and Kevin and Jake obviously pick apart Lord of the Rings, his time on the set of Back to the Future, the Back to the Future franchise, which maybe you guys didn't know that he was involved in, has a really good story to tell from that. And then, of course, playing one of the agents who interviews Ted Bundy on behalf of that revolutionary, innovative new program in terms of agents who interview serial killers to find out some stuff about their patterns and maybe put that knowledge to work to help track other serial killers. Boy, that's not easy to say. So without further ado, the ReelBlend conversation with Elijah Wood on behalf of his new film, No Man of God.
A quick technical note before I send you off to the interview. We lose Jake about halfway through, just some connection issues I wanted you to be aware of before he kind of disappears and doesn't return. Kevin is a pro, though. He takes over, finishes the interview strong for us, so I will get out of your way now and let you enjoy this interview with Elijah Wood.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the film. It's an honor to have you on our show. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've never spoken to you before, so it's an honor to have you. And I'm so fascinated by character choices in terms of the way we are introduced to your character while he's combing his hair in front of the mirror, the way he puts his shirt on, the way he prays, and then obviously later on when we see Ted Bundy's face for the first time, it's through your arm, which is so cool. So I wanted to ask you about character choices like that, what those mean to you, and those are the first times we interact with your characters. So what does that mean for you as an actor to give that to the audience?
Sure. I mean, in this case, because there are so few moments of isolated character moments for Bill Hagmaier in the movie, those moments were really important. So much of the film takes place in the prison in conversation with Ted Bundy, and that is really the crux of our story. But it's also about what's happening to Bill internally, emotionally, psychologically, as he's spending this time with this person. Is it having an effect on him? So those moments, those kind of moments of his private time were paramount in articulating who this person was, what are his feelings as he's about to approach this first meeting with Ted Bundy. So all of that is extremely important because the real estate with that was so small. So it's those moments. I suppose in any other film that we might have more time to flesh that kind of stuff out, and we didn't with this. So those sort of like him combing his hair and putting his shirt on and praying has a little bit more weight to it to articulate something. What is happening to him internally? Is there a sense of preparation for something? What are we trying to project? And a lot of it was just, what is the internal life of this character? The thing about Bill, too, is, and I did speak to Bill, and he very much availed himself to Amber Seeley, our director, and to the production as a whole, in terms of just being there for information and anything that we would ever need, which was an incredible resource. He was great for Luke as well, playing Ted. He had a lot of questions. But the thing about Bill is that he doesn't, as a great FBI profiler agent would be, he doesn't necessarily indicate what's happening to him emotionally. There's a sense of certainly openness to want to receive another person and to have a connection with another person, which I think is what makes him so good at his job. He really is quite disarming in that I think he doesn't come in with a sense of an agenda. He really does want to understand, and I think gives a sense of open humanity towards the subject, and not that without judgment.
Yeah, I like how he held his hands too, like this, which was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, he's also not an easy person to read. So it was important for us to inject a sense of an emotional journey onto Bill. So again, using those moments, those in-between moments, as opportunities to sort of showcase some kind of journey that he's going on. So yeah, super important.
Elijah, expanding on that idea, I feel like sometimes as an audience with films like this, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, we tend to gravitate toward the serial killer. We want to see Bundy or Hannibal Lecter or the killers in Mindhunter. But all of these projects have shown that the other side of the table, the investigators and the agents, can be just as interesting, if not more so. So I'm sort of curious, as an actor, how do you take your character and make sure that they're just as captivating and interesting and that they don't get overshadowed by the killers themselves?
Sure. I mean, I think I wasn't so concerned about the overshadowing, but more just, well, look, the framework of the movie are these conversations, and these conversations happened. They were real conversations. Some of the actual dialogue is based on transcripts, and all of it's based on recollections of Bill. That's pretty accurate. So a lot of my job, the task was to make that come to life in as dynamic a way as possible. Because it is also, it's a film that the structure of the movie is sort of based on these series of conversations and needing there to be dynamics within the context of that. Otherwise, it could be banal, and you want to always have people's attention. And for it to drive something, that it has to go somewhere. So for us, it was about looking at the structure of those scenes and those conversations and working out what's being said subtextually. Both characters are kind of playing a role to a certain degree. Ted is absolutely putting on a face, but so is Bill. And so it's working out what those things are. So there was more analysis than I've done in a while, actually, just because there was a sort of structure, and then wanting to work out what that structure was going to be, to where when we did sit down and we were on set, we kind of had the scaffolding built. We knew sort of how that was going to play, and then we could kind of play within that structure a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the sort of importance for me was that there was a sense of agency to Bill, a sense of there being a central, I suppose, the question that's posed very early on, which kind of becomes the thesis of the movie in a way, which is this: could a normal person commit these acts? Which is what Ted wants to believe, I think, because if he believes, if that is true, then he's not crazy, and he's not a psychopath. He just chose to do this. And so that sort of is also what's driving Bill's experience through this, is questioning whether or not he could do this, looking at the world through Ted's eyes, just inadvertently because of spending time with a person that way, and learning about what that person had done. So just wanting to make sure that there was enough, I suppose, agency within the context of the character, that he's also in the driver's seat as well, despite the fact that it may not appear that way from Ted's perspective. Because if Ted were to smell that he was trying to control the situation, obviously the tables would be turned,
For sure.
Going back to character choices, this was actually really interesting. When I was watching the film, Robert Patrick's character, he's so great in the film. And I was actually speaking with him recently, and one of the things that I told him I was talking to you for the film, and this was actually something I wrote down before he even said this. I wrote down the flossing that the character does in that one scene. And he said, ask Elijah whose idea that was to do the flossing in that scene, and whether or not Robert Patrick was actually really flossing his teeth in that scene. Is there some story there about that?
I don't know if it's a story, but it was Amber's idea, our director. So Amber, she loves actors, and she really did create such an incredible environment for all of us to be creative and to try things. Especially Luke and I in those scenes, in those interview scenes, because we would only ever shoot one a day because they're so long.
Oh, wow.
We had all this space. Occasionally we would do two, but they would be smaller pieces. So most of the time we had a full day for that one whole scene, and they're long, like over 10 pages. So she would really kind of create an environment to be free and to try things. And she would throw things at us all the time that maybe would seem that would be discordant or wouldn't sort of make sense functionally within the context of the scene, but would would elicit really interesting different responses.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was really fun to be challenged in that way and to try things, even things that felt random. And so she really loved that, and I think thrived on, and we did too, thrived on sort of just the opportunity to try different things that hadn't even occurred to us. And another thing that she really likes is in scenes for actors to just be doing something, that it doesn't feel like a sort of static, person sits down, conversation, person stands up, it's over. So just wanting there to be, is there something else we can find that you're doing that just gives it a little bit more energy and life? And that flossing was her idea of that scene, just having his character flossing at the beginning of it for no good reason beyond it just being something that he's doing. And the scene doesn't become about the flossing. It's just sort of a physical act that kind of keeps the scene on its toes, I suppose.
It speaks to who he is too, I would argue.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's all. Elijah, this might be a stretch, and I hope you don't tap out of this podcast when I ask this question, but I wanted to compare this movie in a way to The Good Son, because in a weird way, like in both films, you're kind of going toe-to-toe with a psychopath. And I was just wondering, at any point, did you ever think of The Good Son while filming, or were there any experiences filming the two that were comparable at all, or am I just crazy for making this comparison in the first place?
Well, I see what you're making. No, I see the comparison you're making, and it's a logical one. It didn't occur to me while we were making the film, but I definitely, yes, I see. It is a movie where the two central characters are on one side of evil, I suppose, sure. Right? And the other is sort of contending with the sort of psychopathy of the other. But no, it hadn't occurred to me.
Fair enough. That's terrifying. That's a terrifying film, by the way.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, it is. It is scary.
I will never get over that bridge scene with the dog. I mean, that's still, to this day, that's honestly been haunting me for decades now since I saw that film. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Sure. I've always wanted to ask you this. My wife and I were recently watching the Back to the Future films on 4K.
Nice.
While I know your role is small in the second film, it's got to be incredible to think that was your first feature film debut. You're being directed by Robert Zemeckis, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And I just wanted to know what your memories were. I'm sure you've discussed the film before, but what were your memories of just shooting that scene? But did you take anything from Zemeckis? I mean, what a crazy cool thing to have been a part of, and it's so iconic. What do you remember about that and taking things from Zemeckis from that film?
Man, it was incredible. Unfortunately, I remember Michael J. Fox well, because I had the scene with him. I don't really remember Zemeckis. I was young. I was 8. So, I mean, I didn't take anything away from it because my sophistication at that point in terms of, of what a director does and certainly what his career is, was really kind of in its infancy, truly, genuinely. So I didn't take anything away from him specifically, but he was great from my memory and generous and kind. And I felt the environment was fun. Michael J. Fox was lovely. Like I have good memories, albeit slightly foggy, of like the actual work itself. What stands out is walking around the sort of that Hill Valley central downtown area.
Oh, wow.
That I knew so well from the first film. So, I'm walking around with my mom and it's all been dressed as the future. So there's these futuristic cars driving around and parked, and the exterior of every building has this sort of futuristic new dressing on it. So that was wild because I had seen the original film and understood the comparison, was able to go, holy fuck, that's the clock tower. But wow, the 1950s cafe is now the cafe 80s. Like I was able to contextualize all of those things, and that was mind blowing. And for a kid, also to just walk into a set that felt so real, and that's a feeling that I still get when I walk into a film set. No matter how small, that an art department can do that and create this sense of reality, where you can sort of feel a sense of immersion is still the coolest thing in the world. A backlot still gets me super excited. There's just something
Yeah.
so magical about it. And so to have had that as a first cinematic experience is kind of insane, truly mind blowing, and that those feelings haven't left me.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool to hear that, man. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Elijah, I'm sure I'm the first person that's going to bring this up to you, but this is the 20th anniversary of Fellowship. I know you probably have never heard that yet, but I do have to say that Fellowship has always been my favorite of the trilogy because I love all of you together. I love the dynamic of the Fellowship, and I was wondering if you could talk to me on that, sort of how different the first film was compared to the last two. With the last two, for the most part, you were mostly with Sean and Andy, and I was curious how that was different compared to the experience you had with the entire group.
Sure. Well, I mean, an important thing is that we shot, save for the first couple of months, which were primarily Fellowship that we were shooting, everything else was out of sequence. So when we came back from Christmas break, actually, anecdotally, this is kind of interesting. We started shooting in October of 1999, solely Fellowship starting. Which was probably largely strategic, just in terms of we'd spent all of our time together in preparation together. The four hobbits were together a lot in rehearsing, and it was also we were starting in Wellington, and then we went down to the South Island for some shooting that would have been and was once the wet weather had gone away, shooting of the sort of end of Fellowship of the Ring. So the big orc battle. Boromir being killed, the hobbits being separated, all of that was shot outside of Queenstown. But when we first got there was a rainstorm that flooded a lot of our sets and washed them away. So we had to shoot wet weather cover, and our wet weather cover was a scene from Return of the King.
Really?
And I hadn't even thought about what that was going to be, or where Frodo was mentally and emotionally at that stage, because I felt like I had the benefit of time to get to it. Anyway, we shot that day. It was a whirlwind, and we actually didn't finish that scene for another year, which is crazy. But then after that, when we came back from Christmas break, we went to Bag End and Hobbiton, and then we were shooting out of sequence, and we were shooting every film. So the feeling of shooting Fellowship was always extraordinary because of that group dynamic, and specifically for me, it was getting to spend time with the four hobbits as a unit, which was so lovely. We all were so close. Being with Viggo and Sean Bean and Orlando, having that whole unit and working together on some of those sequences was just always thrilling. And most of the Fellowship stuff was shot in earlier days, so there was some cohesion to that. But yeah, I like you share a specific love for Fellowship of the Ring as well, as a film. There is something about that Fellowship, the connection that they share, the kind of cohesion of that journey, the start of that journey, that then splinters off and becomes so many different things from the Two Towers on. And I love those movies too, and they're incredible, and they're dynamic and super emotional. But there is something really magical about the Fellowship of the Ring that is so beautiful, and I think remains to be my favorite of the three films.
Elijah, I wanted to ask you this question for, I guess, 20 years now. I've never spoken to you before, and I'm a big fan of filmmaking and forced perspective and the way that Peter Jackson used that. And this is something I've always wanted to ask you in terms of the way you would sit next to or stand next to Ian McKellen. And the way they made it look like you were so much smaller than him in terms of I read stories that they would dig holes and actors would stand in them, and that would help shorten the character, but can you talk about the forced perspective that was used in order to create that, whether it was the cameras and the lenses and kind of how that was done, because it just blows my mind to this day.
Oh, it's incredible. And it's one of the oldest tricks in the book, they really did go back to basics in terms of film trickery. That tricks that have been used for 100 years, which is really wonderful. And so, yeah, I suppose the example that is my most favorite and is sort of the most effective and longest in the film, in Fellowship, is Frodo and Gandalf at the dinner table in the kitchen of Bag End, as Gandalf is telling him about the ring, and there's this sort of long conversation over tea. And that was fully forced perspective. So we did share that room. We were in the same space. The table was split into two sizes. One that Gandalf, so Ian would sit at, and one that I would sit at.
Wow.
And the table would move according to the camera movement to keep that perspective the same. So it was on a motion control camera. So as the camera panned, also the table would move and shift to maintain that perspective, so it was never broken. It's really incredible. And you could see that in camera. So we could look at a take in the monitor, and the trick was sold. There was nothing that we had to do. So I was just sat at, one side, and he was sat sort of here, and I would look at a tennis ball, and he would look at a tennis ball, and we would interact. It was really, really incredible. And I think he had smaller props on his table so that his hands looked larger, and he was, he took up much more space. And the props on my table or my side were normal size. So that would also help with making sure that trick hadn't been broken. It's really amazing. That and the cart too. The scene when Frodo jumps on the cart. That first shot.
Oh, the Howard Shore score in that moment. Oh God, it's so.
So right after You're Late, you see a wider shot of Frodo jumping onto Gandalf. That was my scale double, Kieran Shaw. He jumps on to and hugs Gandalf. And then the next shot you see is the two of them sitting, talking about, the fireworks and catching up about Bilbo and all of that as they're winding through the path. And that shot, or that series of shots, was forced perspective. So there was a cart that had been like bifurcated or whatever, where, Ian was sitting in the front and I was sitting sort of in the back, but the camera was again at a certain angle that it made it look like we were sitting side by side carrying on a conversation. Just a joy. We did use one trick that didn't end up getting employed again. It only showed up, I think, once in the film. In The Prancing Pony in Bree, as I check in, as the hobbits are sort of huddled at that front desk and we're checking in, and I remember I have to check in under a different name. I can't be Baggins because I'm being looked for, and so we have to hide. So I check in as Underhill. As I do that, two characters pass, or one character passes and another character pass. They were bigatures, and not bigatures, sorry. They were, what do they call them? They were people in suits. They had a name for it, but they were basically large suits with giant arms and giant hands that people were operating to help with the sense of scale of us against the set, which was oversized for us as we're trying to like peer over this front desk. And then these people in these like stilt suits with giant arms and hands walk by us. And they had planned on using those more. And ultimately they proved not to be as effective. So that was just used in that one shot, but they were rad in that shot. It looks awesome.
That's amazing. I'm going to bring it back to No Man of God because this is something I was interested in when I was watching the film. And I know you have to hard out. So this will be our last question, but okay. I was so focused on the camera work in this film. Like every single angle, the way it was edited together, like there was almost a claustrophobic feeling sometimes when you were in the room. But I was very focused on hands. There was these great shots of like Ted's hands, your wedding ring, his wedding ring, which almost made you kind of equals in that sense, which I thought was really interesting. But there was, when you would press play on the recorder, I kept wondering, was that really rolling? Like, was that tape recorder actually recording what you guys were doing? And is that somewhere now? Did you guys actually roll on that?
That would have been awesome. No.
Oh,
Oh, that would have been so rad if we had like endless hours of tapes of our scenes together. That'd be kind of amazing. No, we didn't record on any of that, so it was never practical. I mean, it ran, but we weren't actually recording. I mean, actually, come to think of it, the record button was on. It did work.
Uh-oh.
I wonder if
the lost tapes.
I wonder. I actually wonder. And I didn't occur to me at the time, but we did have to press the record button. I mean, if it was ever in frame, you know, those two buttons, the play and record, were always pressed at the same time, and it was operating. So conceivably, that could be the case. I don't know.
That's awesome. Well, I just love the use of hands, the way it was shot, and just again back to the character elements of it. It spoke really well.
We were constantly trying to, Amber's intent with our DP was to always get as many little bits and pieces as possible, so that in the editing room there was room to play. There was material, and her focus was just, you know, close-ups, just, you know, macro shots of, to your point, hands, you know, the feet in shackles.
That was so cool when they would zoom in on the shackles. That was such an intense thing, man.
Yeah, I know. I really love that too. It just adds this beautiful texture to the film, for sure.
I'm being told I have time for one more question, so I'm going to throw this out to you, just in general. I find it interesting how fascinated we are with serial killers. And at the end of the day, it's interesting because we pay almost more attention to serial killers than we do the actual victims in terms of like movies and shows. And I always found that to be an interesting psychological thing in terms of the way we consume entertainment, but also watching stories like this. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, why do you think we are so interested? Because when I saw the title of this film and what it was about, I was all in immediately. I couldn't wait to see this film, and then I watched it and I was in it the entire time. I was so immersed in it. I felt like I was in that room to a point where I actually thought that they were the real people. I thought that was really Ted Bundy, and you know, it was really, it got to a point where I believed that I was watching the actual people. And I just wonder like what you feel about in terms of why we're so deeply fascinated by this. And I think a lot of it comes across in the questions you ask him in the film, in the interview style that you're asking him.
Well, I mean, I think humans are always going to be fascinated by the dark realm that they don't understand. And I think that goes back to just human nature. And I think we've been fascinated with it for centuries. But I think, you know, as it pertains to serial killers, certainly in the 20th century, which really does feel like a kind of thing that has emerged within the context of the 20th century, I think it's just fascinated with the psychological mechanism that we don't understand. You know, most of us, thankfully, can't relate to someone being capable of those sorts of heinous acts, that kind of violence. And I think it's fascinating to us to try and understand what it is about someone's internal brain mechanism that makes them capable of doing that. And then as it pertains to Ted Bundy specifically, who tends to get a lot more attention than most serial killers, I think with Ted, it's because there is a perception, I think, largely with serial killers that they aren't necessarily successful members of society. Ted kind of breaks all these weird rules.
Yeah, like, a psychology degree. It's crazy.
Exactly. He's attractive. He has a psychology degree. He was studying to be a lawyer. He worked in local politics. He worked at a crisis helpline to help people, you know, from committing suicide. Like he had this double life that was very successful, that made it so successful that people in his life believed that he was incapable of doing the things that he was accused of. And I think that's why we always come back to him, and why he, more than most, is so fascinating. It's just simply because it kind of breaks our brain, because he's not like Dahmer, who was sort of a shut-in and kind of quiet and kept to himself, or like so many of them that weren't necessarily healthy members of society, and he was. And he was also very charismatic and, you know, a fascinating person to watch, because he also was filmed a lot. You know, he was there's so much footage of his trial, of him acting as his own lawyer, which is crazy. The hubris there is insane. you know, that's also interesting. There's a lot of material to draw from of watching someone kind of go through something that maintained his innocence despite the fact that it was so clear that he was guilty. And it's like a train wreck. It's fascinating to watch that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you very much. This has been an absolute honor. I literally grew up with your films. I remember seeing Radio Flyer destroyed me as a kid. It still does now. And I just want to say thank you for everything you've done for cinema. Thank you for letting us talk about some of your other films as well. And congratulations on this movie. And it is truly an honor to speak with you. And you're such a fascinating guy. And it's nice, really cool to hear your details about your characters and your specifics that you go into. It just shows you really care about what you do. And obviously, so thank you very much, Elijah. It was an honor to have you on the ReelBlend podcast.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, bro. Have a great day and hope you're
have a
staying
good weekend.
safe. Yeah, you too.
All right. Same to you. Take care.
Thanks.
We want to thank Elijah Wood for coming on to talk about his new film. One thing you guys should check out too, because we had Sean Astin on the show, and if you search Sean Astin and ReelBlend, it'll be a little 1-2 punch of Lord of the Rings talk with the ReelBlend hosts. So definitely make sure you guys are checking that out. We also have an exciting interview on behalf of the MMA film Warrior that Gavin O'Connor directed. So that film is turning 10 years old. And it was fun on social media. After we talked to Gavin, I was putting things out there and hearing from a lot of people who love that film. Love that film as much as the three of us do. And it's a great opportunity for us to really go back and revisit. Jake made a joke about the fact that we interviewed him for the Ben Affleck basketball film that he made, No Way Back. And at the end of that one, we kind of had to like sneak in Warrior questions because we just love that film so much. So to get him specifically talking about that film is a great conversation, and he turned into a really informative talk about that movie. So we also have one is happening very, very soon. It's one of those hashtag if it happens, and someone we've been teasing for a bit on the show. So knock on wood, the minute it happens, we'll talk about it on social media, and you guys will be the first ones to hear about it. But yeah. Cross your fingers and do everything you can to help us land these amazing interviews and bring them to you guys. Here on our YouTube channel, if you guys are following us along on the visual component of it, make sure you hit like and subscribe. We love to see the fact that we crossed over 4,000 subscribers. That's fantastic. Thank you guys so much for your support every single week coming over here to watch the video aspects of the ReelBlend podcast. If you are listening where you get your audio podcast needs met, give us a follow, maybe write us a review, and we'll read it on the show. So we'll be back with a lot more content, some more bonus episodes like this, and plenty more ReelBlend here at CinemaBlend.